Hi, I'm Bob Canote, and on this episode of the Cam Chaos Chronicles, I'm going to start a series of episodes wherein I get my buddy here, Old Tex, ready for its second road trip from the Minneapolis-St. Paul area to Los Angeles. Dang it. This is going to be another one of those episodes where we step into the Wayback Machine and revisit an episode that we started last fall, but we never had an opportunity to finish it for a number of reasons. Those of you that have been following my channel, you know what the explanation is for that. So this having to do with cooling, the perfect subject vehicle for this is Old Tex, because Old Tex has had a cooling issue that has gotten progressively worse over the past year or so. If you got one of those problems, pay attention to this episode, maybe the next one, depending on how this one turns out. You might find this useful. Now, the first thing we're going to tackle here is the mild overheating issue that I've experienced this past summer. Now, the way it's been behaving is that when the temperatures are 75 degrees or less, not a problem. I can have the air conditioning running and it stays 205 degrees or less. Oil temperature stays right where you want it to be. However, when it gets above that temperature, then we start to see elevated temperatures, gets up to around 210, maybe a little bit more. Incidentally, I've got the master set of gauges hooked up, and the coolant temperature gauge on the instrument panel, it reads something different than what it should be, as indicated by the master gauge. But it's predictable, so I know what temperature relates to what position on the gauge. So there's a number of reasons why an engine, particularly one that appears to be in reasonably good condition, may overheat. And you can break it down into two things. Either it's producing too much heat, or it's not getting rid of enough heat, or maybe it's a combination of the two. So in terms of making too much heat, well, that comes down to either timing, ignition timing, or fuel and air mixture. Now, fuel and air mixture is pretty easy to have diagnosed. You take it into a mechanic who's got an exhaust gas analyzer, and you have them check that out. The other thing it could be is ignition timing. And either too much advance or too much retardation can cause overheating. In terms of retardation, if the fuel and air mixture starts burning too late, the burning continues past the point where it can really be effectively converted from heat energy to mechanical energy, and all the excess heat goes into the cylinders, cylinder heads, and out the exhaust system. So that's actually the worst. Advance, it can also generate too much heat because it's burning too early in the cycle, pressure spikes in the cylinder, the combustion just sort of rapidly explodes, if you will, and that can keep too much heat in the engine as well. Plus, the pre-ignition and detonation is a bad thing too. Now, in terms of the timing here, it was retarded originally about 4 degrees, but you know, I've adjusted it. I've done a little experimentation, although you couldn't call it by scientific method by any means. Tried different settings and took it out, ran the same course, and as it progressed during the day, obviously it got hotter. But it didn't seem like between 4 degrees retarded and 4 degrees advanced, it made a great deal of difference. So we got that out of the way. Now, in terms of retaining too much heat, that's probably more the issue here. Now, if you recall from the Pikes Peak preparation videos that we did last year, I grafted on a metal pre-HE type of fan onto this engine using a hub to get it up in the position in the housing or the duct that I felt was going to be the most efficient, and then went to Pikes Peak. And it was no problem because the temperatures were around 65 degrees all the way out. But in Denver, it did get a little warmer, and it did start to show the symptoms that we saw this past summer. So it could be that that fan is a problem. It could be that the fan is in the wrong position in the duct. Maybe it's too far forward, thereby, the air spinning off the fan actually pressurizing the air behind, or at least restricting the flow of air behind the radiator. Or it could be just the wrong design fan for the car. All right, easy enough to solve that problem. What we have here is a reasonably good plastic fan. Now, this is not an HE XJS fan. This was actually one that I found in the barn that was actually 3/4 of an inch bigger than a stock Jaguar XJS fan. And having done a little research, I think the fan was originally off of a Series 3 XJ6. So what I did is I just simply cut down the ends of the blades 1/4 of an inch, and being that it was relatively crack-free, I decided to use it. And what I did is, I don't know if you can see this, but I stop drilled for some of the cracks that were here. And also what I did, the cracks that had propagated all the way to the hub, or started from the hub, you'll notice that I've got pop rivets installed all the way around, and wherever there's a crack, I've got 2 of them. And it just so happens that these 2 rivets right here are almost exactly on the other side of the fan as those 2. And being that there's no cracks from the hub to the root of the blades, the real danger here is that a whole section will break free. So maybe those pop rivets will help. Maybe they'll make it work. I don't know. But as I've said in the past, we do these tests so you don't have to. Now, you responsible adult types might be asking the question, well, why don't you just buy one of those cheap plastic replacement fans, which work just fine, and install that and take that whole exploding fan out of the equation? Particularly since I got one right here. I always have a couple of these on hand whenever I can buy them cheap. And sometimes you can get them for less than $100 on eBay. Well, that's a good plan. But there's a couple of things. First of all, when I started out my adult life, I was a teacher and I was a farmer. And these were both professions that at the time didn't pay real well. So what I'd do in order to get to work is I'd buy some junker for $50 to $100 and make it run for another 4 years. And I did that for a long time. It got to the point where I took sort of a perverse pleasure in doing that, taking some vehicle that really ought to go to the crusher and make it useful for another 4 years or so. And it got to the point where in the late 90s, I began to acquire a much higher level of junk. It's kind of why I'm where I am right now. Another point is that this is a YouTube channel. And it wouldn't be a YouTube channel if something didn't explode catastrophically at the worst possible time for your entertainment. So the fact is, I'm doing this for you. Now, other things that can cause the car to not, or the engine to not get rid of enough heat is you could have debris in front of the radiator, or you could have a radiator that's in poor condition. Just it's full of scale and other debris. Now, last year what we did is installed the radiator off of my test stand, which had been freshly reconditioned in the car. So we know that neither one of those is the case. The other thing that is common on these engines is that the thermostats don't work. And last year, when I took this car out to LA over Christmas, it ran really cold when it was cold, like through Denver and New Mexico and so forth. And it started to show a little bit of heating when I was in California. So that led me to believe that the thermostats were the issue. And I replaced both of them. And it did make a difference in terms of the stability of the temperature is concerned. So I don't think any of those things are the issue. Now, another thing that can cause overheating is the accumulation of calcium scale on the inside of the water passages in the cylinder head and in the block. And that may be the case here. I haven't had this engine apart. Remember, this is the one that we went down to Illinois to pick up for $250. There's a road trip video on that last year. I put my best set of used bearings in the engine, and you know, it's really been very, very good. But again, we don't know what the inside of those cooling jackets look like, and the buildup can be pretty, from what I've seen in engines I've taken apart, and you know, the ones that I've got sitting in the shed, they're there for a reason. They probably weren't taken real good care of. The calcium buildup can be pretty significant. And we've got to remember that these engines, and any engine, you can lose heat out through the exhaust system, you lose heat out through the cooling system, the radiator, and also just radiating out from the sides of the engine is a significant force of heat dissipation. And if that calcium buildup gets to a certain point, it can actually, in essence, insulate or prevent the transfer of heat from the cooling system or the coolant out through the sides of the blocks and the heads and so forth. The only thing that we're going to be looking at here today is replacing that old steel fan with the plastic fan, which is a little more in line with what it came with in the first place. So we got a fan to change. We better get on it. Burning daylight. Here are the two fans that are at issue today. This is the one that I had placed on the car before I took off for Pikes Peak last year, and it's a metal fan off an early car. And I put this one on because I didn't have any good plastic fans that I wasn't afraid was gonna throw a blade on the way out and back. It was a simple bolt-on, except that it fit too far back out of the housing, because you can see it's a much thinner fan than the stock one. Now, in order to make this work, I had to move this fan into the fan shot a little bit, so I machined this hub, this extender, spacer, whatever you want to call it, which also required that I make longer studs. All of this is pretty simple stuff. My main concern when I was starting this morning was that I had bolted this setup onto the engine before I put it in, and that it might be a problem getting it out. That's what happens sometimes when you fabricate solutions to your problems. You kind of create others, but it was pretty easy. So just had to take the radiator loose and move it forward about a ½ inch, and boom, came right out. Now this is the fan that I told you about, the one that was about 3/4 of an inch bigger in diameter. I shortened it up and also added some pop rivets all the way around. Other than that, this is pretty much the same thing as a stock XJS fan, except it's about 3/8 of an inch bigger in diameter. Does that help or does it hurt? I don't know. We'll see. A bit of a helpful hint as far as installing the fan back in the car. Put the fan in first, and then there is a space in between the blades that is wider than the others, and I don't know if that's for facilitating the clutch removal or whether there's an aerodynamic reason for that, but that's the one that you need in order to get everything to fit together. Then what you can do, once you got the fan in, then you put the clutch in front of the fan, and then slide it into the center of the fan hub, and then you can use the fan to kind of move it around to get it to slip onto the jockey pulley flange. And at that point then, get a washer and a nut on the clutch hub. Don't turn it down all the way because you need space in order to get the next nuts on. You just want to get it on maybe 3 turns and leave it at that. At that point then you can take and you can install the bolts for the clutch. And that then will get the fan out of the way so that it makes it easier to deal with the nuts and bolts or nuts and washers on the clutch hub. Easy peasy. Well, the job is done. No clearance issues between the fan and anything. And you know what? That whoosh is bad. When you step on the gas, you get that sort of turbine-like whir from the front of the car. That wasn't there with that steel fan. So anyway, let's see how it does. We then took Old Tex on his test drive, and the day was between 75 and 80 degrees, as I recall from last fall. And the question that you have in your mind right now is, did it make any difference? And the answer is no. Changing the fan over made absolutely no discernible difference whatsoever, which was a disappointment, but I kind of knew that that was going to be the case because that steel fan was on a lot of cars for a lot of years. Anyway, we've got a couple of things that we're going to be looking at in the next couple of episodes that are kind of our last resort in terms of getting this problem fixed. And if we don't hit pay dirt on one of those two, I mean, I just hate to call the engine cursed, but it really makes no sense to have a car that you can only drive in the spring and the fall. If you like these videos, like, subscribe, leave some comments down below, and we'll see you the next time on the Camp Chaos Chronicles.